Imperium Romanum, the empire of the Eternal City, the Roman Empire, the most dominant force Europe had ever seen in its time, and maybe even for the rest of its future. For centuries, the Romans dominated the Mediterranean, surviving crisis after crisis, defeating foe after foe. But Rome, though it must have seemed like it at the time, was not invincible, and it would one day fall. But what if that day never came? The 13th was the 1-year anniversary of the first alternate history video I made on this channel. To celebrate, I am holding an alternate country contest, an idea I stole from Alternate History Hub. Hop over to the Discord, link in the description, and detail your own alternate history nation, their politics, geography, any information you want to include about them, even maps and or flags. I'll go over all of them in a video, and whoever put in my favorite submission will get a $10 Steam gift card. Now I know what the first comment is going to be. Actually, if you're talking about 476, the Roman Empire didn't actually fall then. The Byzantines kept ruling for a millennia. And you're right. However, following the fall of the West in 476, the entity that was the Roman Empire was changed forever. It was no longer Roman, but Greek. Instead of remaining Roman Catholic, it eventually split off and formed its own church. And it didn't even hold Rome. So yes, even though this Rome kept going for 1,000 years following 476, we're talking about what if this Rome never fell. Alright, with that, we can begin. Rome had been practically in decline for 200 years before its actual collapse. Even before the 3rd century crisis, during which the entire empire fell into civil war and there were like 100 emperors per year, Rome was facing a number of issues that spelled eventual doom for its long-term existence. So let's begin undoing them. Here is my take on how to save the Roman Empire. The first major issue was that the very leadership of Rome, the emperor, was an unstable position. There was no real law on how to appoint a successor to an emperor, so the military and imperial guard basically took turns deposing and installing emperors. This instability would have to stop, and it would have to stop early. An emperor, one genius enough to fix the many issues I'm going to talk about later, would need to use the broken system to establish some rule of law. Let's say, instead of installing Maximus Thrax after deposing Severus Alexander, the military is won over by a charismatic mastermind who takes over the empire. This is my Deus Ex Machina. In an empire with absolute power in the hands of one person, fixing it requires an absolute genius of an emperor. So let's just say we get one here. With the support of the military, our Wonder Emperor wipes out the Imperial Guard and its power, basically establishing himself as the head of a military dictatorship. To keep the military on his side, he would need to make sure they were paid, which brings us to the next issue. At this point in Roman history, the upper class basically just stopped paying their taxes. Taxes that were supposed to go to the military. This led to decay, the army having to be shrunk, debt, and higher taxes on the peasants. But in this state of absolute authority, our emperor could reinstate taxation on the rich of Rome. A move which would be basically suicide. Yeah, it would be at this point when the upper class would just buy their way into the Roman army and depose the emperor in favor of someone else. But for the sake of this scenario, let's say that all plots are rooted out and the military stays loyal. The renewed revenue leads to the emboldenment of the Roman army, as well as securing its loyalty to the emperor. And with them on his side, a male primogenitor's succession law could be established, finally turning the emperor into a hereditary title, going to the oldest son of the emperor. Sorry, ladies. This puts the empire in a place to thrive even beyond our Wonder Emperor's death. However, it must be assumed that at any future critical moments that I'm going to talk about, the leadership of Rome is at least somewhat competent. Now, let's go over some more changed events until we reach our 476 date. First off, Rome never converts to Christianity. Now, this isn't slander on Christianity, but the internal schisms and power the church held over the realm kind of strangled the government. Also, don't you want to see a pagan Rome survive? Don't you? Please don't dislike the video, Christians. However, This doesn't mean Roman religion doesn't change at all. It's a little known fact that Roman paganism was actually quite adaptive, and was able to incorporate local beliefs into itself and become more appealing. It's also a little known fact that before Rome adopted Christianity, Sol Invictus was added as the new sun god, and was basically Jesus. Just an interesting fact I thought I should mention. Another issue the Romans would constantly face for the rest of their existence was the Persians, who acted as a distraction which kept Rome from bringing its full attention anywhere else. In this timeline, right after the creation of the Sassanid Persian Empire, during the 240s to 250s, the Persians are decisively crushed. And I mean Punic Wars level decisive. The Romans take Mesopotamia. Heavy reparations and concessions and military restrictions are imposed upon the Persians, pacifying them for at least a century or two. Now we reach 376, as the Gothic barbarians flee the Huns and attempt to take refuge in the empire. The Romans say no. In our timeline, they were allowed to settle as long as they joined the military of the empire. But here's the issue with that. The military's loyal to Rome is kind of important, and the Goths couldn't care less about Rome. So instead, the Romans fight them off. And finally, in the early 400s, when the Huns invade Rome itself, through some final sprinkle of magic, Rome is able to crush them. And with that, we reach our 476 date, with a Rome that is united and ready to face the future. The fall of Rome was one massive domino that set off a chain reaction that led to everything about our modern world. The power vacuum in the West that was filled by feudalism and papal dominance, the eventual rise of capitalism, total industrialization, nationalism, everything about the West has changed. Even the ideas of individualism, which the entirety of Western philosophy is built off of, is called into question. For without Christianity and the eventual Reformation, would such ideas ever come about in Europe? The moral codes of the Roman Empire and the modern West are built on entirely different pillars. And as I said, industrialization would never have the need to happen without the constant competition of European states between one another and the rise of a capitalist class to usher in the industrialization. Yes, there would still be advancements. Gunpowder would still reach Europe and the Romans, in fact, probably earlier than in our own timeline, perhaps reaching them in the 9th to 11th century due to the connections between China and Rome. And some forms of steam engines would be used, as such things were known to the Greeks and Egyptians since even before the empire. But mass industrialization like we saw in our timeline would just never occur in Europe. But let's talk about this Europe, this Rome. What challenges does it face advancing beyond the 5th century? Well, first off, Persia would finally recover from their absolute defeat at the hands of the Romans a couple hundred years before, coming to once again be a thorn in the side of the empire. In the Levant and Egypt, Christians would become more and more prevalent of a group, becoming more and more resistant to the empire. In Germania, the tribes were catching up with the Romans in technology, and would begin unifying into real threats to the northern Roman border. In Britannia, the Gaelic people of Scotland raided Roman holdings on the island, as the populace of Roman Britannia became more and more discontent with the lack of protection that the Romans give them. Beyond even this, the empire would face more and more of a prevalent existential question. Was the empire going to remain Latin, or continue to be dominated more and more by Greece? These are the threats facing the empire, and here's my take on one scenario. Skirmishes with Persia escalate into full-scale wars over Mesopotamia. With the northern border temporarily secured with the defeat of the Huns, Rome is able to focus on its eastern threat. Still, the sheer distance of Persia from Rome leads to strain. The Tigris is retaken by the Persians. However, the two empires squabbling was only the beginning of the chaos that would engulf this region, as an invasion from the south, from the previously irrelevant Arabian Peninsula, under the banners of Muhammad's successors under Islam, would strike. Though a formidable force, able to secure a few crushing victories against their opponents, the two empires are able to collectively push back the invaders, take the wind out of their sails, and divide up Arabia. It is at this point the two exhausted empires signed a peace treaty, stabilizing the Middle East border for now. The troubles for Rome were not over. Less than a century later, it would enter into a period that would come to be known as the 8th century crisis. Christians in the Levant and Syria, tired of oppression by the Romans, revolt. The newly conquered Arabs, not so on board with this Roman rule thing, join up in arms. Christianity and Islam united against the Romans. Egypt, seeing this as an opportunity and having a significant Christian populace of their own, declare independence, as the Romans rushed their entire army to the east, leaving the west mostly ungarrisoned. Britannia also leaves the empire, and it would never again see the Roman banner. After bloody fighting and near defeat, the Romans are able to put down the revolt. The empire survives, but it is not united. Latins and Greeks have begun to squabble and factionalize, seeing themselves as the superior people. The Greeks seeing the Romans as oppressors asserting themselves over Greece, and the Romans seeing the Greeks as a people trying to undermine the pure and glorious culture of the Latins, as well as their empire. Despite these prejudices, the Roman Empire still drifts more and more towards the Greeks, until by the 10th century, most emperors coming to the throne are Greek. The Romans are not only facing internal struggles. The new unified Germanic tribes and kingdoms are in a state of almost constant war with Rome. As time passes, Rome takes territory and loses it, takes and loses. However, as the upheaval between the Greeks and the Latins subsides, it is clear that the Mediterranean base of the empire is quite stable. Its great cities are untouchable. Finally, by the 13th century, Germania, which had eluded Rome since the beginning, was under her control. And then, the Mongols invaded. Though already very overstretched, the Mongols have a field day with the tired-out Romans, sweeping into and raiding the Middle East, which had been plagued by Roman-Persian skirmishes once again, threatening the just-conquered Germania. But just like it always does, the empire survives, retaking its land and even moving further east than it would have ever dreamed of. And this is where we'll leave them. A bit, or a lot rather, overextended, but standing strong with over 1,000 years behind them. The Romans remain. Could they survive forever? Truly become the eternal empire? Who knows? Only time would tell.